welcoming you live into Reser Stadium following Oregon State's 36-24 win over UCLA to move to 6-1 on the year. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by BeaversEdge writer Keenan Puncocher to break down this matchup. Keenan, it was a big win for Oregon State tonight. They moved to 6-1 on the year, as we mentioned, move up to 3-1 in conference play, have now gone on a roll since that opening blunder against Washington State to open conference play, won 3 straight, and did it in a big fashion against a very big ranked team tonight. We'll be breaking it all down, and make sure to check out BeaversEdge.com for all the latest from Keenan and I. But again, Oregon State gets the win heading into the bye week. Keenan, what are just some of your initial thoughts from this matchup, and ultimately a big win for Oregon State over another ranked team?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was necessarily the most pretty performance ever, offensively and defensively, some things to be desired perhaps, but I think another one of those games where the team focused on fundamentals, they took care of the ball as best they could, and they just kind of, played behind this Reser crowd. I think, we heard that a couple times in the press conference, how much of a advantage, of course, playing here actually brings to the team. Especially maybe in the first half, I think was really when we saw some of the fireworks, if you were, to say. But yeah, I think, nothing overly amazing, but also nothing glaringly bad. I think the team took care of what they needed to tonight, took care of business like they do. And usually when they do that, that's when they play their best.
You're 100% right. Going back to the game, you look at how it started early, right? UCLA's defense was tough. Atticus Sappington got the Beavers on the board with 2 field goals early on. He was perfect today, 3 of 3, and, you kind of look at how good he was able to kick. And coming into this year, we didn't get a chance to mention this to Jonathan in the press conference, but coming into this year, kicking was such a concern for Oregon State. And while Atticus is certainly not the best kicker in the conference by any stretch, he's been extremely consistent this year and has made a lot of big-time kicks throughout. So he getting him on the board early was great. And then, oddly enough, Keenan, first touchdown comes from Aiden Childs to Jack Velling. Aiden Childs getting his typical one script drive, as we've kind of seen these last couple weeks. Obviously, we'll get to DJ in a minute, but what do you think about Aiden Childs getting more reps tonight and another reps against another elite defense?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. We heard Coach Smith in the presser say that he's their backup quarterback, but every chance we can, we're going to try to work him into the offense. And I think that gets him experience. He's been good when he's been out there. Again, today we saw the touchdown pass from him. And, he's a versatile player. He's shown his athleticism already multiple times this season.
Right.
And, I think in some ways, maybe the defense, the defensive scouting team can kind of expect it. Okay, maybe he'll come out for a drive. But at the same time, it mixes things up. It maybe catches players just a little bit off guard. And anytime you can do that, it works to your advantage. And, man, he knows he's going to probably be in control next season. And so I think getting him out there, being able to show what he can do early, it's nothing but good things.
Keenan alluded to it there. Obviously, Aiden Childs plays his 5th game tonight. The red shirt officially burned. So that tells me that, it was nothing surprising to those of us who have, followed these last couple weeks, obviously because the Beavers have mentioned they want to get him drives. But I think the way that they've done it, they're really kind of saying we're focused on this kid feeling important, being here, getting more comfortable in the offense, as you mentioned, and growing with reps. And, obviously he had that, I think back to the matchup against Utah, had a big throw, a couple bad sacks, but again, just a learning experience for a young kid. And in this game in particular, the passing game was key, Keenan, because Oregon State had to earn everything on the ground in this matchup. You talk about the defense UCLA brought in. The guys in the press conference made sure to make note of it. DJ was talking to us about how UCLA was, allowing the lowest points in the Pac-12. Their defense had been great, and I think Oregon State really was able to grind and then hit the big plays when they needed offensively. And, we look back at, we mentioned Jack Velling's first touchdown. He finishes with a couple again, and he's got 5 scores in 2 weeks, Keenan. Talk about some numbers.
He's on fire, and I think tight end maybe not as utilized anymore in college football or even in football overall.
Sure.
And so when you have a safety blanket, as they say, that you can rely on, the receivers themselves tonight played pretty well. They made themselves open. DJ made the right reads, but man, Velling was there every time he needed to be. Just finds his way to be able to get himself open. He's been a touchdown machine, of course, as you said, 5 in the last 2 weeks. And I mean, anytime you can have, I think, that holistic offense, and I think that's what we're really starting to see from Oregon State. Is not only is the run game good, the receivers are stepping up, but now we have tight ends playing well. That makes for a potent offense, and one that's incredibly hard to cover, because as they always joke, the tight end's always open, so when you throw to them, good things happen.
Yeah, and in a much bigger sense, Keenan, talking about DJU and the offense, diving into this game, you mentioned it there, being able to be the balance. I mean, you and I broke down many games last year and, kind of saw all the highs, all the lows. You and I were in Seattle when Oregon State had a game that was within their grasp, slip away, and then obviously at the end of the year, big time win over Oregon. How much now that we see DJ growing into this role is what they dreamed of when last year, at the end of the year, they're like, Ben Gulbranson can win us some games, but can he hit those big time throws to make us elite? Right. Is DJ getting close to that level in your opinion, if not already there?
I think so, yeah. And I think it's evident today too. He didn't really do much on the ground. A lot of that maybe is the UCLA run defense. They were stout, but DJ really was more of a passer today. I think back to that one play where he rolled out and threw against his body, completed the pass. So I think he's getting much more comfortable. We heard him talk about that. We heard, Coach Smith shout out how, in his first year, he's already really learning the program. He's learning the playbook. And I think he's getting more comfortable. Some of those maybe early jitters and interceptions we saw early in the season aren't happening as frequently. So, yeah, I think, it's the sky's the limit, because I think he's only going to continue to settle in more and more.
No doubt. And, going back to UCLA, I mean, the key to this game for Oregon State was obviously limiting Dante Moore and then, trying to somewhat limit their rush game. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But let's start with Dante Moore, Keenan. He had 3 interceptions in this matchup, and it just didn't look right from the beginning from him. I mean, I think back, obviously Achille Arnold gets the interception right away. Drew Chatfield gets one, and then obviously the game changer was, Oregon State and UCLA were tied not tied. Oregon State led 16-10. UCLA had the ball, I want to say at like the 20, 30-yard line of Oregon State, maybe a little further upfield. And, at that point, right before halftime, we're thinking, man, maybe Oregon State has to go into the halftime break trailing. UCLA was starting to figure some things out when they brought in Colin Schlee to kind of be the more mobile quarterback to Dante. They rotated those guys quite a bit. But then Ryan Cooper Jr., the play of the day. I mean, there were some big ones, but as far as this game itself and how important it was to give them that cushion, Cooper takes a pick 6 right in front of us as we're looking here, right before the half, to give the Beavers just a huge advantage. It was 67 yards.
Yeah, and we heard it over and over from every player and Coach Smith, how just it established momentum, and like you said, the game, it started pretty fast, I would say, for the Beavers, pretty well. We got the 2 field goals and the touchdown, but then UCLA, they did kind of start to trickle back in, and you thought, okay, going into half, what's the score going to be? Is UCLA going to score? And then boom, like you said, that pick 6 just really lit the roof off of this place, because like you said, it was 67 yards to the house, and then you go into halftime with that. I think that just establishes even more momentum. You're feeling confident, the defense is feeling better, and that was really, as we've said, it kind of was a game-changing play.
100%. A couple more offensive plays we hit on before we get to, unfortunately, the negative, because there's always a little bit of negative you got to break down in any game. But I want to talk about the Silas Bolden touchdown catch and the Jack Velling touchdown catch. The Silas Bolden one, was that one of the prettiest double moves you've ever seen, Keenan, to break open? We, in the press box, are like, did he just blow past that guy? And it turned out beautiful, fade down the middle of the field. That was a big play. And then Jack Velling was talking to us about his touchdown, where he's like, I hadn't got that pass in practice all week. Right. DJ said, be ready. And he was wide open. I mean, those plays in the third quarter gave the Beavers the cushion they needed, because things in the fourth, Oregon State obviously didn't score in the fourth. Some penalties came out. The game slowed up. It got a little ugly. Those 2 scores were huge.
They were, yeah. And I think anytime, we were talking about DJ just a minute ago about him settling in. I think a big part of that, too, is the receivers, tight ends, making themselves open, running the routes that they need to get open, not just assuming, okay, DJ will find us, but actually getting open, breaking coverages in defense. That's a big thing, too, because not only then it didn't necessarily tonight, but usually that will open the run game as well, as we've seen all season long as well.
And last but not least, talking about some of the negative from today, Keenan, you and I were obviously watching the Cal game last week, and then, leading into this, the biggest shock of the Cal game last week was how well Cal was able to run the ball. Cal racked up over 200 yards. I don't have that exact figure in front of me, but it was a big number. And you look back at the week prior when Oregon State completely locked down Utah here at Reser Stadium, we figured that would kind of be the same thing heading into this matchup. take nothing away from UCLA, who ran the ball well, but Keenan, they tallied 284 rushing yards. I asked Jonathan Smith about that post game. Was that something UCLA did well? I mean, it is Chip Kelly. That's his bread and butter. Running the ball, finding unique ways to run the ball. But Jonathan Smith, pretty firm, saying run defense has got to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head there in that it does need to get a little bit better. And I think taking the bye week to do that will be big. It's not going to get any easier on the schedule, I think, for sure. And so being able to clamp down a little bit, because it does need to get a little bit better. It's not necessarily the yards per play, but when teams know that, they're going to rush however many times against us, they can usually get the yards that they want. And fortunately, that was kind of the case again tonight. So yeah, clamping down, shoring up that run defense, because secondary's been pretty solid, and we've seen that today. So definitely a point of emphasis, I think.
No, and you're 100% right. The secondary really has improved since that game against Washington State when they were torched, and now it's kind of been, the script has flipped a little bit where now the run defense has been of concern. But a couple last things. Again, Oregon State gets the win tonight in Reser Stadium, 36-24. A couple other Pac-12 games of consequence, Keenan, we got to touch on, because Oregon State, again, as we mentioned, 6-1, 3-1 the Pac-12. They still control a chance to get to the Pac-12 championship game, which is obviously the biggest, goal for this team. Keenan, Oregon goes down. USC goes down. Not a conference loss for the Trojans, but nevertheless, one more team goes, and then Washington State gets absolutely throttled by Arizona, the same Arizona these Beavers will be playing in 2 weeks, folks. So the Pac-12, anything can happen on any given week, and I think that's kind of how you've looked at now Washington State dropping a couple conference games. How does Oregon State avoid slipping up against two teams in Arizona and Colorado who will probably still not be ranked when they play them?
Right. Well, I think preparation, of course, taking the bye week to prep is going to be huge. I think seeing how in 2 weeks goes that game, I think if you can really establish good momentum, that'll really carry over to the next game. Anytime you have those two road games, it's not easy. And so I think, as we heard in the presser, just focusing on preparation for those games. And, like you said, that Arizona team, we just talked about the run defense. I think they had 5 rushing touchdowns tonight. And so that's going to be a huge point of emphasis. But yeah, I mean, the door is pretty much open for the Beavers. You would have loved to beat Washington State, but the door's still open, especially with Oregon going down. And boy, that Washington game is going to be huge here in a couple weeks.
My goodness. I mean, Keenan alluded to it, folks. I mean, now you look at it, obviously the Pac-12 can go many ways, but Oregon State, will go on the road. They'll have the bye week, go on the road for 2 weeks, come back, and then have matchups against Stanford and Washington at home in back-to-back weeks. And even Stanford, Keenan, no longer a pushover like we thought they were going to be. They're maybe finding something out a little bit.
Yeah, that's not a gimme. All 3 of these games are not gimmies. Even with Arizona being hot, you could say, okay, you got to really focus on them especially. But all 3, I mean, we saw what Stanford did the other night coming back. And so it's not going to get any easier. And you said Pac-12, anything could happen. We know that. We know it all too well. And so it's got to be focused. It's got to not be taking anything for granted and really not looking too far ahead.
And speaking of not taking things for granted, we haven't even mentioned in this video, Oregon State's bowl eligible, folks. Remember when that was unheard of? I mean, I remember 2 years ago sitting on this field when they get bowl eligibility, late in the year, and, we're ultimately, got 7 wins that year and then built on it this last year. But it's just a credit to the program Jonathan Smith has built that now 6 wins can happen, in 7 weeks. And that's about as good of a start as you could have asked for. I mean, when you just consider, if you looked at it, I'm not sure I would have pegged the Washington State game as their slip up, but nevertheless, that's where we are.
Yeah. I mean, what a crazy thought. I mean, here we are 6-1 already and bowl eligible, and that's why I think, I know certain players certainly care about the bowls more than others. I think, every player would say, we want to make a bowl game. And so I remember in years past, or even like last year, when they kind of say, okay, that monkey's off our back. Now we can really focus on maybe, like you said, the Pac-12 championship. And, how cool would it be in the last year, supposedly, of this conference to be able to do that and to know that we're well on our way? That's exciting.
It's a very exciting time. And now Oregon State gets to take this, go into the bye week, and then, again, return on the road for a couple Pac-12 road games against Arizona and Colorado. It'll be fun to see Oregon State square off with the Wildcats, and then, of course, Deion's Buffaloes. So should be an exciting couple weeks ahead. But, again, just because the Beavers are off next week doesn't mean we will be at Beavers Edge. We're going to have a whole bunch of mid-season breakdown, kind of diving into the nitty-gritty of how Oregon State's performed in these 7 games so far. So big shout out to Keenan Puncocher for joining me today in the press box, and being on this post-game breakdown video. And we'll be back here in almost a month as we're back at Reser Stadium with the Beavers on the road. But again, Oregon State gets the win 36-24 over UCLA. They take down the number 18 Bruins. They were 15 going into this matchup, with some losses from some teams ahead of them, notably Louisville. USC lost, obviously Oregon lost, so it's going to be very interesting to see how high they jump, but figuratively, Oregon State will get higher in the polls, so lots of like there too. So for Keenan Puncocher, this is Brenden Slaughter signing off from Reser Stadium.